Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here, and today I'm going to do another one of these tutorials for you guys. Yes, I'm doing this at like 4 in the morning, so hopefully it's not too loud outside, but I can't guarantee that. This room echoes a lot, especially with the good microphone. Now, normally when I've done these how-tos, people love it when I make fun of how noobs do these. However, the way noobs oftentimes do these can put a lot of strain on the low back. I have to do a max deadlift tomorrow. I can't afford to risk my own performance or an injury showing you guys how badly people do these exercises. So the points we want to cover, these have been heavily requested for me to show the hip thrust, the glute bridge, the difference between the two, how to set them up. And what's been fascinating to me, I've seen people asking me questions about where do you place the bar. And to me, that's very confusing because I use very, very heavy weights on these. I think the last time you guys saw me do the hip thrust, I did 445 pounds for 5 sets of 10. My last glute bridge on camera was 505 for 5 sets of 10. So to me, when people say, where do you place the bar? I'm confused because there's only one spot you can place the bar. Right? I don't have enough arm strength to place the bar anywhere else and hold the weight up with my arms. In other words, on a hip thrust, you don't have options. And I heard someone say, well, Jeff Cavalier said that you should put it up on your thighs. And I'm like, this is where we come in and say physical therapists shouldn't be strength coaches because he doesn't work with anybody who's actually strong. No strong lifter could physically do that. It would be impossible because you have to use your arms to hold it into position. Well, how much weight are his guys using? I have clients who do 350, 400 plus pounds on the hip thrust for work sets. You can't physically keep it on your thighs. It's going to drop into your hip crease. So I'll show you guys in a minute where you set it, and then people complaining about, well, pain in different places. Well, it's uncomfortable. You have to use a pad. We need to get that out of the way up front. If you don't use a pad on this, it's not going to work. It is virtually impossible without a mat or a pad to do these lifts for anyone who has built any strength base at all. It's just not going to happen. It is going to be so excruciatingly painful that your 10 rep max wouldn't be doable, okay? So forget about that. You have to put a pad on there, or you have to have, again, we call the pussy pad. This is one of the only uses of this. You should never squat with it. So we'll discuss that in a minute of why you guys get pain putting it in the wrong spot. But once you get strong, you don't have options. You don't get to pick where you put it. It's automatically going to go to the right spot. And if your junk gets caught in the way, it's going to crush them getting to the right spot. Okay, you should have started there to begin with because on your first rep, it's going to the right place. Once you get more than 300 pounds on the bar, it's sliding down. So it better be at the crease of your hip, the lowest point when you're at the bottom. It's where the bar goes. It's a crease, it's a valley, and it drops to the bottom of it. Unless you're physically trying to hold it at a higher position, either way. Number 2, we need to discuss posterior pelvic tilt. This is one of these exercises, one of the very few exercises in which you want posterior pelvic tilt. That means the pelvis rolled forward, right? This is neutral. Anterior pelvic tilt is the booty back, like the bikini pose. Posterior means rolled forward. Why? Because if we don't roll the pelvis forward, this puts strain on the low back that we do not want. It's not good adaptative stress. You can pull erectors in your back. It can be physically painful. And it's also going to be painful sometimes for days after you do it. Number 2, for maximum glute contraction, that's what we need. So when we're doing this, you don't let your chest come up either. You don't let your head come back. So I'm going to demonstrate here. First the hip thrust, and we'll get into the glute bridge later. All right, you're going to need a bench. The hip thrust is done on a bench. You need a bench that you can't knock it back. I use my safeties on here. Because if the bench can tip over, it will tip over and it will flip on you. And when you have 300 pounds sitting on your lap and a bench flips over on you, you're going to be having a bad day. It needs to be stable. You should not be able to move it. So you either need a really wide base bench or you need something that you can set up the longer plyo boxes, something in the 15 to up to 18 inch range. When you come down to it, for me, because of my platform here, I can barely do a hip thrust. If this platform was 2 inches shorter, I'd be in trouble. So for the hip thrust, you come over to it. We set up here on the bench, up against it hard. Put your legs out in front of you. All right. You roll the bar to the crease in your hips. For the dudes, your junk should be on the other side of the bar, okay? It should be above the bar at all times. The bar should never at any point be above any of that. If it is, you're like 5 inches too high. Okay, you bring your legs in. So if you see at this point, because I picked the bar up off the ground, people are like, should we reset? If you've got big glutes, you can't reset. The bar is already in the air. It's an inch off the floor. How are you going to touch the floor? Okay, at this point, it's already in the crease in my low hip. You can't put it up on the thighs. You can't put it up on your stomach. There's no physical way to do it. And once you get heavy, if you start trying, when you come to the bottom, if you have it at a higher position, it's going to roll. The bar is going to roll down your thigh, or it's going to roll down your stomach to the crease in the hip. Okay, notice my feet are narrow. My heels are about 8 inches apart. We don't go out wide. You'll hurt yourself. And guys are like, well, I feel my glutes more that way. The glutes are a primary mover on this. It's impossible to not make them the primary mover. That's like saying doing something saying my bicep, I feel my bicep more if I curl a certain way. The bicep is always used on a curl. It's impossible not to use it. Okay, we get a good grip on the bar. We come up and we bring, notice the middle of my back is here. Okay, this is basically the bottom of a hip thrust. Trying to go all the way down, it can get ridiculous. Like, so here, okay, pelvis is rolled forward, my chin is pointed down. This. People say, why don't we go higher? Because then we're going to strain the low back. The glutes are contracted maximally right here. It's still at the crease in my hip. Notice my rib cage is still pointed down and my chin is down. You don't do this yet. See, that actually hurt just for me to do that. I felt a pull in my low back. We're now straining the erectors if you do that. This is a hip thrust. Breath. Again, notice the chin and the rib cage position. I don't let my rib cage point up at the bottom. Pelvis is rolled forward. Okay, and that's a hip thrust. It really is that simple. You don't have options where to put it. Like people are like trying to talk about put it up their thighs. Well, how are you going to do that with any weight? You guys have to be using 135 pounds, which will never build anything. I have novice lifters. I have sub 300 pound squatters who do this lift with 300 pounds. So again, there's a problem there. Now, the difference between the two. Arguably, I would argue that the glute bridge works more glute. I don't care what the EMG studies show. The hip thrust is a better overall hypertrophy exercise. It's going to work a little more quad. It's a slightly longer range of motion. Slightly longer range of motion. However, on the glute bridge, most of us for the same work sets can do something in the range of 50 up to about 100 pounds more weight. Now, people will say, well, Jason, is reducing range of motion for more weight beneficial? You said oftentimes that's not. Yeah, if it changes the exercise to the point to where the muscle does less work. For example, the lockout on a bench press, the lockout on a rack pull. You're at a mechanical advantage position. The glutes have to work the hardest at the top. Okay, the glutes have to work the hardest at the top. And so when we do a glute bridge, if we use 60 more pounds for our 10 rep max, and it's at the maximal contracted position of the glutes, we've essentially removed some of the support musculature. So if we're trying to build big glutes along with quad, hamstring, all that stuff, the hip thrust may be better. Not everyone has a setup to do it. If we want just more glutes and maybe a little less focus on those others, and we have less equipment, we want quicker setup, the glute bridge is a better exercise. Well, let me demonstrate. And it's the exact same movement. In fact, it makes a good supplemental lift to the deadlift because it's quick to set up. Whatever you just deadlifted, you can strip a little bit of weight off or same weight, you know, you have to keep the same loaded bar. You just drop a towel down, put the pad on it, and you do a glute bridge. It's the same exercise, just done on the floor. And you can reset on every rep. So again, also allows for a bit more weight because we have a dead stop component. The glute bridge, we do the same thing though. We come over to it, sit down, roll the bar to the crease in the hip, pull your heels in. This. Now, I find with the glute bridge, you frequently have to pull your heels back under because they tend to slide, especially with towels. It's hard to keep them in position. So you may have to readjust multiple times. But we keep it at the crease in the hip, use the hands to keep the bar from rolling. Right, I've got my elbows locked, keeping it in that position when it's on the floor. Yes, it's a shorter range of motion. We go from a dead stop, but the glutes at peak contraction are going to have a heavier weight because we can do more weight on this. Like I said, on this I do 505 versus 445 on hip thrust for sets of 10. 60 pounds difference. Again, peak contraction. Notice we don't try to overextend. Keeping the pelvis in posterior pelvic tilt. And you don't let it roll back at the bottom. Keep it forward. I don't know if you can see the difference. This is me rolling back. Strains the low back. Roll it forward. Use the bar to keep it at the position of the crease at your hip at the bottom with your arms. Again, don't overextend it, because then it may try to roll down your pelvis and it puts stress on your low back. Okay. All right, so our key points, our takeaways here are we always want to be at the crease of the hip. And at the bottom of the hip thrust, that's going to be the lowest point in the valley. So you don't want the bar rolling down your stomach. You don't want it rolling down your thighs and compressing your junk. You always use a pad. We need to focus on posterior pelvic tilt so that we work the glutes and we don't strain the low back. And that generally includes keeping your chin pointed down so that you can keep the rib cage from overextending and rounding the low back at the top. So that's the two exercises. That's the difference. That's how you execute them. So I hope it has been informative, and I will talk to you guys next time.